approaches art and poetry more than construction at some point. I like to keep it real and get it built, but there should be a big vision, like a vision of beauty, of being really functional and useful, and being strong and sturdy.
You're listening to Build the Unbuildable, a podcast about designing dream cottages on some of the most challenging sites in Ontario's cottage country. All right, welcome to Build the Unbuildable, the podcast about building high-end homes in impossible places. My name's John Tyreman, and as always, I'm joined by James Pitropov, Principal Architect at Lakeside Architecture. James, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well today, John. How about yourself?
I'm doing well.
That's great.
I'm excited about our topic because this is one that I'm curious about, and building on steep, nearly completely inaccessible sites. There's a lot that goes into that, and I'm sure that we're going to unpack it. And, we'll talk about site conditions, regulatory constraints, and then creative design that goes along with the form of the land. So, I'm excited to dig into this one.
It's going to be a good one. It's going to be another deep dive, John.
All right. So, James, let's start with an award-winning lakeside cottage that you designed in the Kawartha region in Northern Ontario. What was it about this location that made it so challenging?
Yeah, that's a good starting question there, John. As an architect, I'm the chief architect at Lakeside Architecture Inc. We're focused on lakeside architecture, interesting sites, and we're always looking for opportunities that make particular sites interesting, open up the possibility to explore different types of forms, create a better dialogue with the owner, more interesting conversation regarding design possibilities. So when we came across this client and their property, we knew we had a challenge to explore and to address. So this is in the Kawartha region in Southern Ontario. It's on the edge of the Canadian Shield, so it's a pretty rugged topography, a lot of surface bedrock. The interesting thing about it, though, is that the site characteristics have the bedrock of the more northern regions, the granite bedrock, and limestone mixed in on the same site sometimes. And you can notice this when you're driving up Highway 503 and 507 in Ontario. You get to a point where you're driving through the highway, along the highway rock outcroppings, and first you're looking at limestone, and then you're going a little bit further north, and then you're onto granite, which is more characteristic of the Canadian Shield. And then a few kilometers down, you are into a mixture of both. So it's a very rich environment. It creates a very craggy lake shorelines, and a sort of convoluted topography. Basically, hilly, steep sites, and sometimes you're finding that you're building right up against a lake. The thing about this lake here is that there were cottages that were built quite a while back, probably about 80 years ago at the time, and they were all built very close to the shore. This particular cottage, the original cottage you see there, was built within 20 feet of the shoreline, and very secluded. It had there were some other outbuildings, and it was part of a compound actually. And the thing that I found interesting about it, to answer your question, was rather than a deep, narrow lot going in, this was stretched out very thinly along low-lying shoreline. And I knew there would be constraints with the topography, with the municipal bylaws, as well as with conservation authorities. There are new regulations regarding distances from the lakefronts, location of septic tanks, so there's a real puzzle in the making there.
Yeah, I can totally see how that would be. We talked on a previous episode about do we renovate? Do we build anew? And it seems like this particular build was a little bit of a renovation, building on top of that footprint. Do I have that right?
Well, here's how things developed. At the beginning of the project, there was that classic discussion of whether we reno or we build new. And it was an interesting structure because it had some length to it, which was a function of maximizing views along the lake and so on at the time. However, with the topography of the site and the harsh winters that we have in cottage country in Ontario, over the years there's been a lot of settling. There's cracking, windows no longer open and close properly. They get jammed when your structure is settling differentially everywhere. So it was pretty clear at the time that it would be a tear down and build new. Now, the interesting thing is that the owner was really clear that they didn't want to lose that proximity to the lake. So one of the first things I caution cottagers is to not knock down any structure before we get a surveyor on the site, locate the building, the footprint, elevations off the water, proximity to the water, proximity to wells, property lines, and septic, and so forth, and note the condition of all of those, and prepare an actual study of existing conditions. This became critical because we ended up having to get municipal planning approval as we went through what is known as a committee of adjustment, and ultimately a change to an application under the Planning Act to get approval on this project here.
Interesting. And so what was your experience like navigating that? Because when we talked on that other episode, and if folks that are watching this or listening want to go back and really do a deep dive on renovate versus building anew, definitely go check out that episode. But just quickly, James, what was your process like kind of going through that with that regulatory committee?
Yeah. So, John, it was clear to me that we had to defend the client's ability to build in proximity to the lake. So what that meant is we were going to go in through some clauses in the bylaws that would permit building over the existing footprint. Now, it varies from municipality to municipality. Overall, the intent under the Planning Act is to preserve the lakeside environment, meaning they don't want to see a lot of more development on the lakes. Aesthetically from the water is one of the concerns. Now, the way that different municipalities enact that, it varies, and at times, well, with this municipality, their solution, like other municipalities, was to regulate the impact on the lake by setting up a setback from the water, pushing the building back from the water. Now, the way the rules work is you need to have part of your building over the existing footprint, and in this municipality, part of the solution was pushing backwards, but there's a formula that they use so that as you push further back, you can go wider with the building. And there's this interesting play about you have to have almost have one leg still on the original location of the building, and you can stretch back, but your width and your height will be regulated by particular formulas. And this is true in the Kawarthas, in the North Kawartha Township, in the Muskoka Lakes, Gravenhurst, Bracebridge. They all have these formulas that they work with. It's challenging and it's very intimidating for a lot of homeowners. But that is the first step, is to figure out what the rules are and then to know your intent. I knew we had a battle that we'd have to go through with special approvals for this layout.
Very cool. Well, it sounds like it's quite the red tape that you got to navigate there. So,
well, the constraints, John, they're off-putting to a lot of people. That's clear. But in a way, those are the rules of an intricate dance of design and working with constraints, working with budgets and people's preferences and so on. It's part of the whole process of exploring what is best for a particular site.
And I suppose layering on constraints is one way to unlock creativity in the build. So why don't we, if for folks that are joining us on YouTube, we have some photos that we want to share. And James, I would love for you to kind of walk through these photos and give us some color commentary about this build and about the process that you went through.
That sounds like a plan. As long as your viewers are okay with it, I think that's the way to go.
And if folks are listening to this, check out the YouTube version so that you can follow along visually with us. All right, so James, what we're looking at right here, I'm assuming that this is the old structure, and we're going to start from ground zero.
So ground zero, the client gracefully invited me to explore the property. So we had a look at the existing structure. I like to measure things. I like to understand how the property was used, how the family uses the structure itself. So we were out there early on in the process, right in the winter, and difficult access, no paved roads, unshoveled secondary roads getting back into the backcountry. But this is what we did so that we could get a feeling of the property. It's remote, it's very private, and it has a history to it. This has been used by their family over generations. There's a compound there. It's on a point, John. And there are several buildings, and in some ways, there's a strong feeling not to change any of the structures at all. Now, creativity is one thing, but buildability and what actually makes sense in the real world, whatever that means to you and I, is another. So I like to work with real, I do like the constraints, John. So right away what we did was we did our own inventory of the property, the history of it, their preferences, their wishes for their new cottage project. And then as soon as we could in the spring, I had a surveyor get on the site. Now, having a surveyor is really important because on one hand, you want to be very clear about your boundaries, about setbacks from the lakes. Where is the actual lake level? Typically, it's done geodetically, meaning it's based on a fixed height over sea level. So you've got to get out there. You need someone to map it for you, i.e. a land surveyor. And that is instrumental in understanding the actual setbacks, because sometimes you'll find that the water levels, for example, sometimes they're just mapped. Sometimes they're on municipal mapping. Sometimes they have different rules. You need to know the rules that they're working with because it significantly affects your build zone. Then our surveyor will map the actual setbacks that are current with the municipalities, also with the conservation authorities. In our area, John, water levels are very, they're critical and they go up and down in some areas. So there are sensitive, environmentally sensitive areas that may be prone to high water pretty much on most lakes and particularly rivers in Cottage Country. So it's important to get that down. A secondary function of the surveyors that I'm really interested in is their ability to produce the topography, the topographic lines of the project. So they're in the bush taking elevations of the slope, which you can see there. Those are the topography lines. And then, as you might know, John, I'm working a lot with 3D modeling. So these days, I'm actually putting the contours into 3D modeling programs, even physical models like this one here, so that we can get a real understanding of what the slope is as well. Because where we position the building is going to affect the cost, it's going to affect the functions, and the buildability of the structure as well. Hardly anybody does it. I hardly see it at all. It's a real important thing to do. One thing I find too, John, you can learn a lot as you go through the process. And if you think of it as a process instead of just services, you learn from the people that are doing the work in the field. If you don't mind, I could tell you a little quick story about one thing I learned in the field one day. Well, on one of our projects on Lake of Bays, which is closer to our hometown up in Huntsville, we were in the bush, and the surveyor was telling me about the trees that they encounter in the bush. And what we have up here are these beautiful balsam firs, and they have these little blisters on them. Mm-hmm. And he was busy telling me that if you ever cut your hand in the bush, you can poke these little blisters, and you put the little sappy turpentine-like substance on your fingers, and it'll heal your wounds right away. Well, I thought that was pretty amusing, and then he turned around and he had blood all over his arms, and I thought it was some kind of prank or joke. And it turned out that he wasn't paying attention for a second, and with a hatchet, he actually cut his finger.
Oh, jeez.
And true to his word, he healed it up with the balsam fir sap. So now we know, with a little bit of knowledge for your viewers there, is that in the woods there are plants that can help us out, and knowledge is all around us in the bush.
I didn't know about the balsam fir sap. I did know that about yarrow, which is a plant that grows naturally around here, can be used to help stop bleeding. I think that is an incredible point, James, about thinking about this in stages and going through this process is incredibly important because you don't want to put the cart before the horse. You want to make sure that you understand the topography of the land, how that impacts the cost. Is it within the right zoning and regulations? I'm curious about those setbacks. So it seemed to me like there were different setbacks for different authorities, and you had to find kind of like the common ground there, or is this two regulatory bodies working together to determine what the setback is?
Well, that's a great question, John. Sometimes the requirements are conflicting,
Okay.
and they all go back to the highest use of the land and compatibility with bylaws which are set in place to protect the environment on the lake. In a lot of cases, in most cases on tough sites, I am going through committee of adjustment approvals, and there's a discovery period where you come up with a design, you come up with your site, and you sit down and you have a conversation. At the end of the day, the municipality will tell you whether they feel that they will approve your proposal or they won't. And a lot of times it's strictly based on setbacks, it's based on frontage on the lake, it's based on the height and constraints of topography and the hydraulic characteristics of the site, meaning are you building over an area that has surface water running through it? Like, are you building on the edge of a ravine or a watershed? So in preparation, we're also having a study done by a hydrogeologist. They'll come out and they'll take those topography lines and they'll tell us where the water is running. Are we building in a way that's blocking the flow on the site? And is that impacting anything on the floodplain?
Right.
And then, which introduces another layer of complexity is we have the flow characteristics, is how are we affecting the environment? Mm-hmm. So when we put together our proposal for this project, it was the municipality, it was the conservation authority, it was neighbors' concerns as well, and also effects on the environment. Now, this particular lake has a pretty deep shoreline, which leads to deep water. It is what is considered a lake trout cold water lake on Ontario. The concern is we are down by the shore, we're in the low-lying area, there's lots of trees in there. The concern was if we are too close to the lake, people are going to see it, the new cottage. And that was a concern at the time because apparently the mayor of the municipality had just built the beautiful new, just a giant palace of a timber frame home on the lake. And this quickly was going to catch up with his feet there. Uh-oh. And on the smaller lake, it is an issue. It seems a little silly, but people don't like when there's something new and they don't know about it. Just came up. So a lot of the questions, like it just seems that there's a little bit more scrutiny of the projects. So on this project, the last constraint was addressing the environmental characteristics so that this clearing of this land and building of this building would not add to the siltation or heating up of the sensitive cold water habitat. In the end, it was a proposal that addressed all these constraints, and those constraints actually enhanced and created a more rigorous design that started to follow the contours, and each part of the layout, which we can discuss, address particular concerns from the regulatory bodies.
Let me ask you, did you have to do anything special to address the mayor's feelings in your proposal?
Well, there were issues of scale. You know, John, in Cottage Country, there's two ways of thinking about design. So one is that Cottage Country there's a lot of history to it. It goes back to Scottish and Irish settlers heading up by train to resorts. American, Buffalo, Detroit, coming up to the lakes, and there were resorts, there were hotels on the lakes. You got to them by steamships such as the Seguin on Lake Muskoka and others. And there's this idea that everything was sort of traditional filigree, the beautiful Victorian peaks and very sort of like formal, beautiful style of building. Well, the days of having the trades that will actually build like that and the cost, those are beautiful values. They're beautiful places. I've built many beautiful, more traditional style buildings. And I think this is what, in this case, the mayor was looking for. Where are the steep peaks and where's the beautiful gables, all that fancy stuff. Now, on the other hand, the other cue that we can take, we can look at iconic Canadian architects, and you might have heard me say this on previous podcasts, but I draw a lot of inspiration from the late Canadian architects such as Arthur Erickson, Ron Tom. They were building out on the West Coast. They were dealing in the real world of steep sites, access, views, nature, which brings up the second way of building, which is more modern, but using natural materials, big Douglas fir beams, open glass areas, weathered steel. And the advantage of these more modern structures is in some ways they can be more subtle in the environment because they don't have the big steep peak roofs. They don't have all the fancy details on the turrets. They're simple glass areas. And when you're in them, John, you have a real sense of connection to the lake. They're just simplified and modern. At their best, that's what they are. So the challenge was showing the mayor that this type of more modern structure could be used to reduce the profile in the lake, blend in a little bit. The Douglas fir works in the trees. Everything doesn't have to be traditional. And if I can give you another mini story, John.
Yeah.
I did another project in a small town outside of Toronto in Claremont, Ontario. And without any disrespect to any designers out there and builders, Claremont is a small traditional farming community with a lot of history to it. There are some places where overall, you just shouldn't build modern structures. And I had worked with the owner there to do a very sensitive addition to a century home that he did, included a breezeway and walkouts and had beautiful gardens and so on. While we were doing that, a builder, developer had gotten in and they pretty much built a modern house that looks like a mini mall.
Oh no.
In a street that had like chicken coops and horses, the hobby farm, old church, century church, and it was traumatizing for the owners there.
Yeah.
So this is what I try not to do. Like when I get on a lake, John, the first thing to do is to respect the environment. And there's a word that your listeners might like. It took me a while to figure out exactly the full meaning of this, but architects will call it the genius loci of a place. It's a Latin word, and what it means is it's the spirit of the site. Mm-hmm. So when we get to the site will let you know as you start to design, and you will know what works best. And to answer your fuller question, even the mayor, you can even turn the most critical observer, and they're critical because they care about the lake.
Right.
If you have the right discussion and you're sensitive to the conditions and need, you can express your ideas or explore them and share their concerns and ideas. Everybody can be happy, even the mayor.
That's why I think it was totally worth unpacking that, because, at first glance, on the surface, it may seem like there was some pride and some ego involved in there. But I think to your point, as you found, digging back the layers, it was really just a true love for the lake and wanting to preserve the nature and environment there. So
yeah, and John, which brings on onto the next thing is the approach by the town, and then they started to get this a little bit later. Their approach on the site was, if you're building anything new, it's got to be pushed back away from the lake. Right now, you're 20 feet from the shore. It's a little bit lower lying compared to the adjacent land, and there's a lot of tree cover in there. And we either leave the building there because we don't see it now and we like that, or push it way back. Now, the problem with pushing back on this property was that it pushes you up the hill, and which is completely acceptable. So if you're back 120 feet or even 100 feet, you're up about 40 or 50 or 60 feet, probably around more like 40 or 50 feet, which takes you above that shrub line. And then you're really sticking out. Like you were just out there, and
Yeah.
you look like the Love Boat cruising along the shore with this big giant structure floating by. So that was the first thing, and you'll see in some of the photos, like we really had to dig into the site, but there were some surprises underneath the surface as well that started to affect this positioning, where we wanted to keep the structure near the shore, and we wanted to keep the roof lines low, which is why the flat roofs made sense. But the other constraint that we haven't talked about was, as we went up the hill, there was some subsurface. There's a point where the subsurface, I guess you could call it rubble or talus, it turned into rock face.
Yeah, so let's get into the build. Taking us up to this point, you went to the site, you got the survey, you got a feel for the land, you went through the zoning commission's regulatory approval from the town, the municipality, and so now you're beginning the build. So let's get into that a little bit. Let's maybe we can follow some of these pictures along and we can get into that.
What I recommend to clients early in the process is, when we get on a site, let's have a look around. Maybe we can clear out some of the shrub trees. There are trees that are affected by boring beetles, like the ash borer. Some of them are already dead, or they're going to be dead soon because they're full of carpenter ants and so forth. These are some trees that we can clear, and then we can do some explorations on the terrain. I suggest getting a mini excavator in there, a good crew, maybe even like a little skid steer. Have a little team and pick around on the rocks and see what is underneath there. Generally, you can find a couple of things. It's either what most people would just call like soil, I guess, or gravel or soil, which you can build in. There's also bedrock, which you can build in. Now, there's a problem when part of the terrain is on one type of soil and the other is on another type of soil. So we really got to dig down. And what we thought we had here was solid bedrock, but it turns out, after hammering on the stone there with what is known as a hole rammer or a rock hammer, the rock was fairly loose. So you can't have that. So you've got to clear it out. You've got to dig back to more solid terrain. And what we did here is we cleared out, and we were left with just a long strip of terrain there, which was very long and narrow. And there were some construction challenges, which I'll tell you about shortly. But it had to be scraped out, and we scraped out quite a ways, and we had to bring in engineered fill, which goes down in 6-foot lifts or drops, I guess you would call it, with what is known as a stone slinger, and it's tamped down, and the engineer comes in and certifies that you can build on this level. Now, this is what we did on this site, and however, what I would recommend when we're at that point on a new project, I would ask viewers, well, instead of a lot of work on the terrain, because sometimes it does include blasting, it includes removal of material. You take it to landfills, it takes up space in landfills. Although we try to reuse a lot of the stone for the site-shaping, would you consider simplifying things and going on piers, or having a partial basement instead of a full basement? You are in cottage paradise, out in the environment. You're not in a city. It is not necessary. It may not be necessary for you to have the full basement and a giant rectangular footprint. Can we work with the site a little bit more closely?
Because you want to follow the form of the land, and just so I'm following you correctly, and going the route of the full basement, let's just use that as an example, you would need to do a lot more blasting and potentially granite, right?
Well, exactly, John. And if you know the material, granite is pretty dense, and
Right.
what is done is with the construction company. As you know, John, I'm a registered architect. I'm Lakeside Architecture Inc. I have a separate, completely unrelated company which is focused on the logistics of getting things built, and also tracking costs and making those final decisions on the best way to build. That is Lakeside Construction Management Inc. What I've learned on that side is everything adds cost and adds work. So if we're blasting, that means there's drilling down into the rock, there's putting C4 or other explosives in there. You've got to have the match on there. There's a certain time period in the year when you can do the blasting. You do the blasting, you've got to take it away. Any amount of blasting is probably going to start at 40 to 50 grand. up here on the property, and there are people that will sink in $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 and more on Lake Muskoka, on Lake Bays, so that they can get their ideal building there. But if that's your ideal building, like maybe you've got the wrong site if you got to sink so much money into something which I think is wasteful, and maybe your viewers would be relieved to think, well, maybe we can work with the terrain, work with some levels, clear the land a little bit, and see what it suggests. In a lot of cases, John, what it needs is we build on different terraces. We try to clear some terraces on the site. That's why that the surveyor's topo is important. We can do the 3D modeling, and we'll work with the terrain instead of working without it. Here's an example here. So the issue was, and this is interesting, the issue is that we're cutting into the terrain now. So there's another constraint, is how much removal of the site do you want? And this is what transpired. This is what was required to keep the height down. So we did dig into the hill there. And what we do here is a lot of, for international viewers and our US followers, what we do is we'll use ICF, a lot of ICF foundation construction, which is basically insulated forms. They're set up, they go up pretty quickly. You fill them with rebar that's engineered, and then you fill it with concrete, and that stays in place. You can quickly build structures. You can build retaining walls with it. Well, the other constraint now is we're building this wall on the slope. We're cutting into the slope. Now, is there water underneath the ground that is fighting against our wall there? Because that water will increase huge hydrostatic pressure on the walls. If it doesn't push over your walls, it can cause water to get into basements. So another good reason to consider going on piers. However, in this case, what we did is we also dug trenches on the upslope side that go underneath the slab. They're reinforced, and with a weeping tile system, they drain out underneath the slab, and they also have a heat trace in them. This is a little bit of site knowledge, but everything is possible. It adds some costs, but we explore going from the simple to the more complex, and there's always a level of constraint, which is requiring some design response.
Sure. Yeah. This is, and so I suppose that was a concession that you made because of, obviously you want to work with the land and you want to maximize the most flat area possible, and those are in limited supply here. So that was just kind of a design concession that you made to keep that location.
Well, what you'll notice, if you have a look at the image there too, the actual outline of the building started to follow the line of the least excavation. And that might seem fairly straightforward, but 99 out of 100, let's say 99.9% of cottages and luxury homes that are built, a big box is placed on the site. It has a gabled roof on it, and it looks high from the roadside, and they look enormous from the lakeside, and that's what turns off a lot of people from new development. By the use of these long walls, if you can parallel the site, you can step down the site in a beautiful way. Yeah. And here are some, there were some great American architects as well that were quite highly respected. Modernists such as Richard Neutra down in California, LA, Palm Desert. They knew how to build with the slopes, and they were building with long walls. So one little tidbit or one little jewel for your listeners is, can we use walls, long walls? Let's stop thinking about boxes only. Can we use long walls to adapt to the site, reduce the amount of excavation, follow contours, create new sight lines? It's a really exciting way to build, and it comes from the site and not from our preconceived notion of what we think we should build there before we really explore the site.
And it brings it back to, what was the Latin phrase that you mentioned earlier? I've forgotten.
Oh, the genius loci.
And the building with the spirit of the site. And it seems like that's just kind of a guiding principle throughout, where, even the blasting example, right? Sure, it adds cost to do blasting, but you're also kind of really making a visceral impact on the environment by doing that. Not just the earth itself, but then also everyone around has to be subject to all that blasting. So that's one example. And then with the walls, and working with the land is another way to not disrupt that environment as much. So I'm seeing that as a common thread throughout.
Yeah, I think there's some value in not fighting what the land is telling you.
Yeah.
And not everything has to be so forcefully and aggressively and combatively done. There's a design process there, and it can be based on the constraints. It'll be based on budget. It'll be based on the lay of the land. It can be based on your neighbors, their concerns,
Right.
and even the mayor, him or herself. I like to think that everybody's opinions are valid, and I try to address them. And I think just being responsible is the right thing to do, and it creates new, exciting unexpected form. Meaning, one day you'll look at the property and say, "Wow, this really makes sense. I'm glad we didn't blast that hillside," or we
Right.
see how going higher here would have really diminished not only our neighbors' views, but just overall would seem too big for the lake. So that's one of the things that I've discovered with our clients. Something else that's interesting too, John, is the idea that, well, is it still like one long box with some long walls on it, or can we think of things almost like parts? So can we break down your ideas in parts? And the thing I like about this presentation, John, is that what we're discussing is we're not discussing the actual building. We're discussing a process of how do we break down the site? Like, how do you build the unbuildable? How do you approach challenging sites? And I would say, if you have a challenging site, it's a great opportunity. Don't be discouraged. But there's work to be done in terms of communicating ideas and testing them out too. So one way I like to test out ideas is I'll take your ideas or client's ideas, and we'll lay out in our 3D modeling, we'll lay out all the ideas and spaces at work, kitchens and living rooms. You can face the lake, or you can face the sunset. Do you want the bedrooms to face the morning sun? If you like that morning sun shining on your face, some people don't. Guest spaces, and then can we break apart the structure? Like, can we think of it almost in terms of separate pavilions with even their own character sometime, and then redistribute them somewhat on the site, add breezeways, and the whole thing becomes more organic. And then you've got the ideal view from your living room. You've got the great long view from the bedrooms. Nice entrance, breezeways. Sometimes John's the space in between the buildings. So if we break it down and atomize it a little bit, meaning just pull things apart, is that space in between that's really interesting. And in our environment on the lakes, like in the winter, it's quite cold, but if you're sheltered from the wind, it makes a big difference. And the shoulder seasons, spring and fall, it can be quite nice being outdoors, but it helps if you have a bit of a windbreak. So can we use the ability to spread things out on the site plan a little bit to create some useful outdoor spaces? And there's a precedent for this with, as you know, John, from our previous discussions, farmers, they would build and have a rows of trees blocking the northwest wind. Farmers that wanted to have a usable space in the winter outdoors, they would have that space facing the south or southwest, blocking the northwest wind. They could do work outside. When it's above freezing, if there's sunshine out, it's actually pretty comfortable to work outside. But if you have a wind on you at the same temperature, it's not super great. If you ask anybody that's worked outside.
Yep.
So that's the next big idea is that let's find those terraces, levels, views. Like, let's be guided by some terraces, some views. Like, let's work with the site instead of feeling flustered by, wow, it's really steep coming in. The builder said that we're not going to be able to drain to our septic. We're down too low. We're down too high. We've got a blast. We can't get the hydro in. Like, all these issues, they're actually opportunities, but it's the process of incrementally really observing the assets that your site has.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of thought and intention that has gone into so far the location and the footprint and the orientation of this build. And now for folks that are joining us on YouTube, and they can see we're starting to get into some framing. There's some construction that's happening here. Is this all? You mentioned you like to use timber frames. Is that what's gone into this build?
Yeah, we're starting at the we're starting at the lowest level, and apologies to viewers that are interested in only the eye candy version.
You'll have to wait till the end to see that.
Well, there's that, and you can go to our website, lakesidearchitecture.ca. You'll see the latest and the greatest. Also, if you hit up our Instagram, you can see what I'm working on week to week. But in this session here, understanding the steps might even be more helpful to you because that's where you can make decisions and you have the most impact on how things are done. So what we discussed so far is preparing the site, working with the site constraints, the necessity and opportunity to break up the floor plan so it follows contours and different surface elevations. And if typically what I'll do is we'll do concrete down below if clients want it. I like the idea of having full timber frame structures, which you can see on our website. However, for people that are unfamiliar with the technology, basically there's two technologies that work really well in cottage country. One are ICF foundations. Most people are familiar with them. Most of the builders, I would say, and a lot of cottagers may be familiar with them. They're not too common outside of cottage country. What they are systems of insulated forms that are lightweight. They pop open. They're separated by spacers that can receive reinforcing bars. Concrete is poured into them, and then they are set in place. What a lot of viewers may not know is that you can actually, with the ICF, you can get pretty creative. And in my past, John, I like to learn about I'm an architect, but I also like to learn how things are built and put together, particularly on the construction management side of things. So once you take some of the training, I've done the new Dura ICF training. I've trained in timber frame construction. I've physically built construction, worked equipment. Everything is possible. And even with the ICF, which seems like is a basic system and you get your nice little insulated rectangle, you can be creative with it. You can thicken walls. You can create more articulated structures. You can have breezeways in between it. So my suggestion is it's a good system for setting up concrete really fast and thinking of it in terms of panels. Now, timber frame is what I like to put on top of it. Typically, we're using Douglas fir. I've brought in a lot of Douglas fir out of BC, and previously I've built a lot with panels, structural panels. Some of them have come from the States. There's panels in Ontario and Quebec as well, depending on your particular project requirements. The idea of timber frame, or this version of it, is a little bit different from traditional framing that you see on a lot of cottages. This is post and beam. It has more in common with probably mid-century modern post and beam ways of building. What it is posts, and then the posts are straddled with you either double the posts or you double the beams, and different structural members straddle each other. So it's a good way of putting together construction components. If you want the traditional frame and you want the mortise and dowel connections and all that, you can do that. But this is a fast, really effective way of getting the look. And it is true to its nature. It builds a open interior with long spans, which really fits that northern environment quite well.
Okay, so is what we're looking at here. This is the posts, the beams, and then the joists over top.
Yeah, this is just the first level where the structure has been extended to the exterior. It doesn't include the main structure at all.
And then are these the panels that you're talking about?
Yeah, this is just closing in the structure. What I've done in a lot of cases, if you want to expose the timbers, in most cases I'll put the interiors on the inside, and exterior walls I'll have panels with clear birch on one side, or sometimes we'll use a nickel gap, Douglas fir cladding, which basically is Douglas fir with little strips in it. These are materials that you learn about just being on the field and seeing what is being built on the lake. But the idea is to have a lighter looking timber frame structure above, and then a heavier concrete structure below. The advantage of this that viewers will see in later photos and other projects as well, is that when you build with the concrete on the bottom, you can build a ledge around it, and you can place stone on the basement level. The advantage of having stone on part of your structure is that it's authentic. You can match it to the site. You can get it from a local quarry, and visually it ties your architecture to the ground. Like, it looks like the real thing because it is the real thing. And it also protects the structure from the snows that we get up in Cottage Country. And I know on our particular cottage, we'll have 3 to 4 feet of snow blowing in across the water in the winter. A lot of places have the same amount of snow. You need to protect the lower part of the structure. Stone is a beautiful way to do it, and using local stone supports the local economy, which we love to.
And so is that what we're looking at here in this picture? You've incorporated the stone into the foundation?
What you're looking at in the picture there is more use of the quarry stone for building up levels on the site. And on the previous photos, what we were doing is we're building up a base so that we can put stone cladding. It's real stone. It's band cut on heavy equipment, but it helps if you have the ledge, like on the next few photos, if you have the ledge there. And this might seem pretty basic, but thinking in terms of stone below, like timbers above, and flatter roofs, which we can get into, is a good way to build. So, John, the thing is, there's a short construction season here, and likewise in places in the States, like a lot of the upstate places that you have south of the border there, there's a constrained building season. So we want to get as much built as possible. Of course, it just turns out that we become experts at building in the winter because things just go that way sometimes, and you build in the winter. But if we can get things done, buildings closed in the summer, and have things closed in by the fall, meaning the roof is on, the windows are on, it means that you can have workers working all winter, and they're not going to be terribly uncomfortable. Now, what we have here is Douglas fir timbers, and they'll span 10 to 14 feet is what I like. Oh, wow. And between them, we'll have purlins, which are smaller members, and then across those, the actual Douglas fir tongue and groove planks will span about 6 feet at the max for a 3.5-inch board. 4 feet if you're going like 1.5 inches. There's a little bit of finesse there that you can play with to see the look that you like. I like the big spans personally, and what you end up with is big open spaces. It can go up quickly, and the idea is if we can then clad it with panel systems, and I'll discuss a couple of ways of building with panels, then you are really ahead.
I bet you those beams are fun to put in.
Well, they're heavy, and
that's what I'm getting at.
A pretty solid crew with some very long beams. We'll have a crane in there, and there's a few ways of getting things in place, but typically it's helpful if you have a crew that is experienced in timber frame construction, timber frame or post and beam. Now, excellent. here's a good one. So, John, part of the challenge is we want to build modern, meaning simplified, open spaces, unobstructed views to the environment, but things don't need to look austere. And there are wonderful design magazines out there, but the result, they make all modernism look very slick and way too austere. So what I like to do is, by using these natural materials, it warms things up. Like, you can have a totally modern structure and it's super strong. Like, these are super strong structures. They're gonna last indefinitely, and they go up quicker, and you enjoy the beauty of the warmth of the wood. There's something about that Douglas fir, John, that just goes with those Canadian Shield lakes, and for international builds, it's a global market these days, John, and everything gets shipped out pretty readily. This sort of construction, this will work in upstate New York. It'll work on ski chalets in Colorado, out on the West Coast. There's a big market for it, and I think people are familiar with it for traditional construction, but there's a whole new way of building where it's just a little bit lighter than traditional timber frame. It's post and beam, the connections are different, less reliance on steel fasteners, more focus on other fastening systems. So there's a lot of benefit aesthetically to this system as well, and it connects you to the site because it's natural. and it's organic.
Excellent. Well, James, let's give the listeners and the viewers a little eye candy to
Yeah,
go
let's
with
do
it.
it. This is it. This is what it's all about.
This, I'm assuming, is one of your 3D renderings.
Yeah, that's right. That's prior to the build. So what I'd like viewers to consider is the most important thing is your vision. And you're the one with the vision. You're the expert on the site. You deserve to fully explore your opportunities, and you do have opportunities. What I would do is, like, there's a lot of media out there, and there is an overwhelming amount of material that you can look at. When you see something like this, like, you can take a part of this. Like, this is obviously a big dream here. The first thing is to establish your own dream and to realize that this is about something more than building a cottage or a vacation home. This is about a vision. Do you have a vision, and are you willing to explore it fully? Is it important to you? If you have that in you, it's a good process. And you can take something like this, you can take a part of it. You can say, well, that looks enormous, and I wouldn't build that. But maybe you would build a part of it. Maybe you would have a cabin or a studio, and think of it more as a system. You know, can I see myself taking part of this and adapting it to our site? Can I adapt this? The issue, John, with a lot of the prefab stuff out there, and there are well-known metal prefab systems, and there are prefab panel systems. The issue is they are not flexible. They're not flexible to begin with, and there's no commitment from the designers of the systems to adapting to sites, because that's not what they do. They're manufacturing a product. Here's the product. What I like to offer as an alternative to clients is bring the vision. Let's see what we can do it, and it approaches art and poetry more than construction at some point. I like to keep it real and get it built, but there should be a big vision, like a vision of beauty, of being really functional and useful, and being strong and sturdy. No drywall. Well, let me correct that. Some people want some drywall for various reasons, and that's okay. But we have an opportunity to go natural materials, Douglas fir, clear birch, reclaimed hemlock floors, quarry stone. If you're in Muskoka, please try to match the stone that you have on the site. Like, what I like to do, John, is I like to get actual samples and then go to the quarry and see if we can get mixes that are really close to the character of the site. I do a lot of poured concrete floors. Oops. It's our engineers next door. I was putting it out there that it's not related to architecture related assemblies. Our insurance company would make us say that. But John, what we do a lot of is we'll do poured concrete floors, and I like to go on the site, get some of the gravel, get some of the stone that we have on site, and match it, and then put it into the mix of the concrete.
I like that.
Add some Portland cement there, and have a very clean looking stone that relates to your site.
Now, this is all fantastic, and I think your point is well taken in that you need to have a vision. You need to know what you want. So, for folks that are watching this, for folks that are following along, if you how can you help them develop their vision? What if somebody has ideas but they don't really know how to put it all together in a way to really convey that to you?
Well, John, here's a great first step. Everyone thinks that, or a lot of people that we've talked to think that design is one huge immediate commitment. And what I suggest is check out our website, lakesidearchitecture.ca. Give me a call. Typically, I'm either on site in a manufacturing facility someplace looking at stone or steel or windows, or I'm in my studio. So give me a call, and what I can do is I can give them a quick demonstration on our 3D modeling of the types of projects that we do. Then show me your ideas, and I'll give you it's a quick freebie, let's call it that. You know, they say that nothing is free, there's no free lunch. I'll give you a quick freebie because I wanted to show you there's so much opportunity, and it's a fun process. Let's do a little quick exploration, and visitors can decide for themselves. Is this valuable? Can we see ourselves exploring? What can we do with our site plan? Do we go to the next step? How do we situate a building? Next step, how much would this cost? Do we want to go into full floor plans? How far do we go? There's steps to the design process. They're really fun. They're super productive. And there's always an off-ramp at each stage. If you think it's going too far, it's too much commitment, you can always put back. The thing that I find is that I caution people that want to build their dream there, particularly if they're building the unbuildable. Why settle on one consultant or one builder on what they believe? Let's test it. Let's get your ideas. Let's get exactly right. And let's use the technology we have now, the latest software, the latest construction management software that's tracking lifetime, the cost really quickly. And by quickly, I mean, you can get an idea of things in 5 days. You can get a preliminary idea of something that might really work out for you and your partners and your family. On the other hand, other projects, you can, if you're building a long-term dream, if you want to stay in the process, you can stay there a year, you can stay there in 2 years, continue designing while you're building. But my approach is to test in 3D, make it real, make it beautiful, make it buildable, and then most importantly, I want you to unleash your vision. And we're serious about that. It's a real calling for a lot of us, and I hope it is for your visitors as well.
Excellent. And so folks who want to take you up on that freebie, you've put together a PDF guide of reflection questions to help guide users to, or potential customers to, expressing their dream homes. And so folks can get that at lakesidearchitecture.ca, correct?
Yeah, that's right, John. If viewers want to get onto lakesidearchitecture.ca, have a good look around. There's links to the social media. You can see the latest work. There's a lot of the latest going-ons on there. I think that's a new word I just invented.
Sure.
The going-ons, they're all on there. They can pick up the PDF, and it's helpful if you have an idea of what you're kind of interested in already. If you have a scrapbook, and if there are ideas that you had on Pinterest, or there's great sites such as house.com and numerous other sites that can go on, start to pull it together, but use that as a guide, just so I know where you're coming from, what's important to you. For me, there is no, and I've said this before, there's no silver bullet to design. It's more of an exploration, and at the end of the day, the viewers are the experts, but we've got to draw that out, and we need a process that makes sense and is incremental, so we can souse out all the beautiful details that can be pulled together into a project.
Excellent. Well, James, this has been a fantastic conversation. I learned a ton about building on steep, unbuildable sites. For folks that are listening along, subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and check out lakesidearchitecture.ca. James, until next time.
Thanks, everyone. It's been fun. I hope to hear from you. Give us a call. lakesidearchitecture.ca.